Well, hello and welcome. You're watching India Fights Back with me, Rajat Kane. In this edition of the show, we'll take a look at the need to understand the dangers of reinfection of COVID-19 or coronavirus. In a recent study released by Indian Council of Medical Research or the ICMR, it has found reinfection in 4.5% of those who contracted COVID-19 of the sample size they had taken. The study was done over 1,300 individuals. The study, which is published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Infection, was conducted to develop an epidemiological understanding of reinfection and assess its magnitude in India. So how big is the danger as we stare at a rapidly rising numbers in the second wave of COVID-19? To understand this phenomenon of reinfection in this particular virus, we are joined with Professor N.K. Ganguly, former Director General of ICMR. Many thanks, Professor Ganguly, for joining us, and Dr. Anil Gurtu, Director Professor, Department of Medicine from Lady Hardinge Medical College, Delhi. Well, many thanks, sir, for joining us. Let me start with you, Dr. Gurtu. Sir, given the nature of virus, let's have a peripheral understanding of it. Is there a possibility of a large-scale reinfection? I know there is a study that was conducted by ICMR. Sample size was fairly small and even the result was 4.5%. Yet we can't discount the possibility of reinfection. But in terms of scale and magnitude, how important is it to understand this phenomenon, sir?
In terms of developing an understanding of reinfection, let us first begin with the first premise. What is this reinfection phenomenon and where is it arising from? Why is it? What is it due to? Reinfection means I have been infected and I get another infection sometimes later. I get reinfected. Now, for reinfection to occur, either or both of two phenomena must form the basis. One, the immunity developed after the first infection has waned, has come down for whatever reasons, or it was low to start with, to begin with. So the immune system has lost its former capacity to counter, to react and respond against the virus when it comes back again. One. The second is that a new mutant, a variant has arisen which escapes the existing immunity against this virus. So these are the two broad frameworks under which we can understand what and why is of this reinfection. Now, coming to the most basic thing is what does happen really when someone gets infected for the first time, and how does the immune system behave over a longer period? So here, the immune response to the first infection of COVID is not monolithic, homogeneous, 1 + 1 = 2. It is not that way. It is heterogeneous. It is a spectrum of immune response to a developing COVID infection. What is this infection? Response of immune response. Some 11.6% never develop significant antibodies to their first infection. They don't. But that doesn't mean that they are not protected. There's another component called the T cell response. The T cells of these patients who are lacking antibodies after the first infection are also known to develop imprints of the virus and through the memory system respond. So 11.56% are the never responders in terms of the immune response or to antibody response to the first infection. The second chunk of this spectrum is a rapidly waning, rapidly declining immune response, antibody response to the first infection. I develop infection, I develop good antibodies, but after 6 weeks, it comes down. It begins to wane down. This is the second part of the spectrum. Roughly 26.5% belong to this segment. The third segment is a slow wane, a slow decline. Not over 6 weeks, but over 6 months. So initial response was robust. 6 months later, it has become suboptimal. It has come down. So this would be roughly around same 27, 28% responders. And the last of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum are more persisters. Their immune response persists at a high level even at 9 months or beyond. So we have a whole spectrum from no response, albeit protected by the T cell behaviors, to rapidly waning response within 6 weeks comes down, to slow wanes within 6 months comes down, to persisting even at 9 months. So where on the spectrum of immune response is that person located will determine whether he or she gets another infection or not. So since the T cell protection is there anyway, backed up in the memory system, my assumption is that the reinfection rate will be quite low if tested against a larger sample, not the smaller sample. It would be closer to 0.4 or 0.7% rather than 4.
Right.
So that is the thing. The second is the mutant, which are emerging and which could escape the immune response.
So we'll come to mutant part, but let me just have a reaction from Professor Ganguly here. Professor Ganguly, many thanks. You've been waiting here, and you just heard Dr. Gurtu here elaborating in terms of the nature of this virus, and of course, like the immune system from, say, a very low immune system to average to extremely high immune system. So we understand the study in terms of the sample size is fairly small. It's 1,300 individuals, and it's spread over 8 months, from January to October of 2020. But does the findings of study of reinfection poses any sort of concern?
One of the things which we need to revise, that the infection rate which has been published, today's infection rate is very high. It is about 11 for all the diagnoses which are being pulled out. So our vaccine has got many places the reinfection has been reported, and there are many theories for these reinfections. One of the theory for reinfection is the mutants which have happened, and particularly the 2 studies which we have got, one from Michigan and one from California. California double mutant is one California mutation and one Brazilian mutation. So there is reinfection which is occurring when the vaccine efficacy there, both Moderna and Pfizer, is 95% and more. Our vaccine efficacy are around 70% if we take the best scenario. So 30% of us may not have mounted a very good immune response. And we may get reinfected both by the normal virus or through the mutant virus. In India, we do not have that data. Or as Dr. said, there are escape mutants of those who are vaccinated, and these escape mutants again could infect us. But this is not a concern. Even if we have not launched a very strong immune response, we will not have a severe infection and we will not be hospitalized. This data is already available. So we need to get vaccinated. And at this given moment, I will cite the California experience. It was almost like wildfire, and infection rate was very high. Today, it is the lowest in US, and even with the mutant, it is lowest in US. And the answer is their vaccination rate, which is very, very good and very high, and they are planning to open by June 15. So this gives a very strong pointer to us in India that we need to, at least the states which are having this raging infection, we should vaccinate everyone from 18 years onward. Finally, I will like to say that now there are some very good vaccines available in international market. These vaccines have been reviewed by very strong regulatory bodies and have gone to millions of people. We need to pre-book and make, because one of the things which we might face is the shortage of the availability of the vaccine. Even if we want to immunize everyone, the shortage thing is already making round. Although we don't have the figure of how much is the shortage, we need to address and bring in as many available vaccine as possible so that there is no shortage of vaccine and we are able to immunize where we are having surges the majority of the eligible population.
Right, right. That's really important. So, of course, we need to ramp up our vaccination drive as well. Whereas in this episode, we are currently focusing on reinfection and its danger, of course, it's extremely essential to also emphasize on ramping up the vaccination. Dr. Gurtu, you're talking of the mutants. So, how much of the mutants have or rather pose possibility of contributing towards reinfection, even if at a very small scale?
I'll begin with where Dr. N.K. Ganguly was just referring to the Californian example before us, which is a very positive example. Now, the double mutant detected in India, which has been found in around 20% of Maharashtra samples. This double mutant, what is it? Biologically, it is a combination of two mutations. One is E484Q. The other in this is what Dr. Ganguly just referred to, the Californian variant, which is the leucine at position 452 has been substituted by arginine. So now this is that Californian thing. Now, when this is the double mutation that this carries, it has been detected. To what extent it is driving the current expansion is not clear. To what extent is it causing reinfection is yet to be settled. It could theoretically cause, yes, an immune escape. Even if it happens, as Dr. Ganguly just said, this is the mutant that has come from California. Now, in California itself, when they vaccinated, they conducted a good saturated vaccination strategy. Along with the COVID appropriate behaviors, they brought down the entire infection rate despite the mutant being around, which caused a flare up initially. So from that example, we can extrapolate that the same could happen here, that our vaccines may not protect mild infections, but they will definitely protect against severe hospitalization causing infections or deaths. They will protect even for these escapees. And if we vaccinate, at least to begin with, indirect vaccination strategies of vaccinating everyone over 45 and the rest of us, including those who have been vaccinated, follow the COVID appropriate behaviors. Going by the Californian example, we too will be able to bring down this expansion of the virus within 4 weeks. We can do it. If it happened in California, it can happen here also. So that is what I would like to say on this.
Right. That's really important. Again, like Dr. Gurtu, you're also emphasizing upon, of course, like the COVID appropriate behavior. That's highly essential, and that is what experts are saying in every episode. Experts all over the world are saying, do not forget to maintain COVID appropriate behavior, because that is something which we can absolutely take care. And of course, like these are small things that are required to fight the pandemic, and that include wearing face masks, washing hands, and maintaining social distancing. Professor Ganguly, as we have been debating about like the second surge, how it happened and what possibly were the reasons for it, of course, like there is a complacency factor that we are seeing, and you also emphasize that we of course need to ramp up our vaccination operations. Is there a particular group that, given the dangers of reinfection that you see, needs to be vaccinated? Why I'm asking, since we are emphasizing on reinfection in this particular episode, so is there any particular vulnerable group of population which poses a risk of being reinfected?
Yeah, vulnerable group, of course, is those above 50 or particularly above 60. I just
50 and 60.
NCD map of India and of Uttar Pradesh and many other states. The majority is 40% of these are cardiovascular diseases. About 9% of these are diabetes. So these are the cardiovascular diseases enhances from 49 and above, and 70 plus above, it enhances very highly. So cardiovascular diseases, kidney diseases, diabetes, but cardiovascular is the main. They are the vulnerable. Spreaders are different age group. Spreaders are 29 and above. Cannot, because they are asymptomatic and they are the highest spreaders actually. So we need to handle these spreaders. So we have to include in the vaccination all 18 and above group. Apart from that, the best vaccine, like India, the best vaccination result is in 70%. Best vaccine is the mask. If you do double masking, it is 85%. This is scientific data. And this has emerged through research and publication. So, ma'am, and we need to create the super spreader events like Bombay train services, Punjab farmers agitation, West Bengal polls. So if you really look at, we are actually having plethora of events within India itself, where inappropriate behavior actually is spreading the infection. So we need to communicate with them, and we need to tell them that please or create examples where we are able to do this. One last point I want to make, that another super spreader behavioral event is coming from schools and universities, which are at this given moment have opened up. And here we need to invest in schools, very heavily in schools, so that the class sizes are small. They get PPEs, they get sanitation, and all the teachers are vaccinated. We have 12 to 15 years age group results also at this given moment, but not of the Indian vaccine. There's a Pfizer's vaccine data. So we do not know whether we can extrapolate it here or not. But teachers, we should put them as a priority. The school bus drivers and all those adults who are in the school. So these are some of the events. Apart from vaccination, we need to look at and see that they are appropriately funded so that they can implement these. These recommendations are already there. The CDC has come up with a very good recommendation. Even the 6 feet distance has been removed. It is now 3 feet. So we need to really look at that we are able to.
Right. Well, that's very important. Dr. Gurtu, your take? I mean, as Professor Ganguly just mentioned, there are these super spreader events, be it an essential exercise or compulsory exercise like elections or other things. So even when somebody is taking precaution, but given the scale and magnitude of these events, do we still run a risk of adding numbers or increasing positivity rate? Is there a way out to balance it out? Of course, the life has to go on. We know, like currently, some governments have imposed, say, restrictions. But is there a way to balance out the normal life as well as COVID-appropriate behavior, or we really have to go for some sort of restrictions at this stage at least?
No, we can balance out a normal or almost normal life with COVID appropriateness of our response. They can be balanced. And the key in this balance will be on test, trace, isolate. Test, trace, isolate. If we can enforce these as rapidly, dynamically evolving cycles, taking them to the areas where maps throw up clusters, micro-containing them, and repeating the whole cycle, back tracing, other than forward tracing, we back trace, backward tracing, contact tracing, so as to make sure where was the indexical primary super spreading person and or the place where it happened. What was it? So that back tracing can be combined to the forward tracing, and the back tracing will enable us to get to the super spreading event from where we can then forward trace others. So rapidly shifting, dynamically adapting, test, trace, isolate, quarantine, test, trace, isolate, quarantine, those kind of rapid cycles leading to micro containments. And if this can be expanded, amplified across the entire geography rapidly and real time, tracing at least 30 within 24 hours of contacts and responding to their being traced. If we can do this, then hard lockdowns and all will not be required really, because we are adapting very dynamically, micro-containing and moving on as the situation evolves. So we can float with the situation using this test, trace, isolate strategy if it's robustly enforced.
Right. Dr. Gurtu, before we wrap up, just as I asked Professor Ganguly as well, since we're talking about reinfection in this particular episode, that's what the specific coverage is for this particular episode. Is there any target group that you suggest should be extremely careful about, say, reinfection, that they are the ones who run into a risk of reinfection? I know you explained in terms of our immunity and immunology strength, but in terms of age groups and exposure, which are the group who should be completely careful about it?
Dr. Ganguly just said very rightly, in terms of the likelihood of getting reinfection, I'm talking of reinfection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Likelihood.
Yeah.
That displays an age gradient.
Okay.
And there are 3 age thresholds which Dr. Ganguly just defined. One is, let's say, 45. Those below 45, very low chance of getting reinfected. It's around 0.4 if you go by the other studies outside, not ours. As you climb up above 45 years and 65 and beyond, there's a steepening of the curve of the magnitude, the number of people who are likely to get reinfected. Going up further the scale of age, 75 to 80 years and above, the reinfection chances, probabilities grow even steeper. So beginning at 45, first threshold 65, next threshold 75, 80, it's a steepening curve of the likelihood of getting reinfected. So as our current strategies of vaccination, therefore, are focusing on 45 plus. Why? Because the consequences of reinfection and other adverse outcomes, should you get so, are far worse above 45. Less, much less under 45. That group is mostly the spreaders, asymptomatic spreaders. So they can be tackled with social measures of COVID appropriate behaviors until we finish the vaccination of the more vulnerable 45 plus, which display a steeper age gradient.
Right. Absolutely. Many thanks, Dr. Anil Gurtu, for explaining us the concept of reinfection in the virus and, of course, like what all we need to do. Many thanks, Professor Ganguly. Pleasure to have you in the show as always. And of course, like both of you experts, just as you highlighted about how that we all need to maintain COVID appropriate behavior. And that's precisely our appeal to our viewers as well. Please listen to experts and do not listen to any hearsay or any other unconfirmed, unverified information. Keep maintaining COVID appropriate behavior, keep washing your hands, keep maintaining physical distancing, and do not forget to wear a face mask. Well, that's it in this edition of India Fights Back. Thank you and goodbye.